Hello there, welcome to my channel. This is the second part in my review series around the iFlytek AINote 2. The first part we focused on hardware and kind of take a look at a little bit of the startup process. Here we're going to delve deeper into some of the key features of the software. We're going to talk about the battery life results from the testing that I've done, go into my pros and cons of the device, and then get into my final recommendation plus a few kind of footnotes, I suppose, to my experience working with iFlytek, and then we'll wrap things up. Everything's chaptered, so if you want to zip ahead to something of particular interest to you, feel free to do so. Otherwise, I hope you enjoy the video, and I'll see you at the end. We're going to start our demonstration just by showing the simple process of creating a notebook. And so this is essentially the home screen here. So it focuses on notes. And then you can also see you have access to their calendar, which they call schedule, and you have access to their reading app down below. But we're going to go ahead and click on this icon called Note. And then this type of window comes up. And you have a little icon list down below. One is the title. So if I click on the title, I can go in, you can either go with the default name, which is the date and time, or I can go ahead and back out of that. And then I'm just going to go ahead and write in a title. We'll call it Haya. And see, it didn't quite translate that perfectly. So that's a good example of where OCR isn't necessarily as good as I think it should be. I could have also just typed it in. So if we go over here to the keyboard, let's go ahead and type that in instead so it's accurate. There we go. And then we'll click Confirm. Now, down below are two of the last templates that I've used. So I can either click on those and it'll pop up, or I can go into the More, which will give me access to all the templates that are available on the device. And there are quite a few templates. Here's what they call the style ones. Here are the planners, page 1 and page 2. Here's the document, page 1 and page 2. Here's the analysis, which fits on a page. They have a health section, an other style, which has a number of pages. This is 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, and page 5. You'll notice a lot of these are not automatically downloaded, so you just have to click to download them, and then they'll download fairly quickly. And then you can go into the custom, and this is where you can bring on your own templates, and there's the specifications of how it would recognize those. So that's basically all it takes to start a notebook. And all I have to do is tap the screen. I'll use my eraser, and that macro basically goes away, and you're in the notebook. Just really quickly, up above, that's your back button to get out of the notes. You've got an undo and redo. This is where you can select your pen types, which you can also do, of course, in the drop-down bar, because they have global pen types. That's the Smart Tools section. We'll get to that in a second. This is the text box. We'll actually take a closer look at that in just a little bit. There's an AI button. That's voice recording. This plus is basically where you can either do a new page or insert a mind map. You can export here. And those are the options there. This icon is basically a quick link to some recently opened notes. We'll talk about this with Smart Tools. It's basically kind of an outline section. And then there are some other toggles as well. So that's pretty much your note-taking app. And lastly, you can hide that menu bar by clicking on that icon there. Perhaps the biggest change from the iFlytek Air versus this device was the introduction of mind mapping. And you can do that within the context of the Notes app. So I'm inside a notebook now. And we showed earlier that if I click on this plus icon, I can pull up that option to do a mind map. But I can also go over here to the text icon. If we click on that, you'll notice that there is this kind of outline icon here. So if we click on that, then there are a number of formatting options, both in terms of how bold the text is, as well as doing bullets, checks, and of course you've got some basic formatting, indentation, and so on. But you also have that mind map option here. Let's go ahead and click on that. And we're going to start off, it's going to start off with this icon that says Central Theme. And if I click on that, I have a couple options. This window pops up, so I can go in and put in whatever I want here. So we'll go ahead and erase those contents. and we'll say start, like so. So now I've got a couple options. I can either create a branch from that or here with this icon, or I can click on this plus, like so. And we'll go ahead and write in here. Okay, we'll go ahead and add another branch here. Like so. Oops. Okay. Now there's also this option here, which allows a second branch to be created. So I can either use this to go to the right, or I can use this to kind of add more items that are a sub of the previous box. Like so. Now, in addition to that, I can actually move things around by clicking on the boxes. So if I click on this 4, I can drag it and I'll put it right here with start. Oops, let's try that again. There we go. And now we can see 4 now, instead of being aligned with 3, is now aligned here with part 2. And you can keep going on and on. There are instructions about how to use the mind mapping. If you just click on this text here, it will pop up with a 4-page dialog window. Now, when we get out of mind mapping, we click on this check there. It'll save it. Let's do that one more time. And now it's embedded in the notebook itself. If I wanted to edit this, I could long press it. And then there's the option to go back in to edit, or I can delete it. And I can create a separate mind map by clicking on the table of contents and clicking on that icon there. So this is a new feature, again, introduced with the AINote 2, and it works pretty well. One of the key aspects of the iFlytek device is its utilization of what they call smart tools. And the way you engage with those is you either press the button on your stylus when the point is really close to the screen, or you can press this icon right here. And there are 4 things that can happen when you're engaged in this mode. The first thing is that you have a lasso tool. And then when you lasso something, you have the ability to join a task, do an AI search, clear it, or you can cancel and back out. So that's pretty straightforward. Let's go ahead and get out of that, like so. The other 3 things you can do, though, is create a task list, create what's called a focus star, and then what I'm calling kind of an outline item. And let's just kind of take those in turn. So I'm going to go ahead and create a task, and all I have to do, again, I've selected my Smart Tool icon there, is draw a circle, like so. So it's going to translate that to a perfect circle, and it's going to take this text and basically indicate this in the Task Manager part of the calendar. And we'll go take a look at that. Then there's the focus star. I'm going to go ahead and draw a little star, and it's going to translate it like that. And it's going to take this text and put it into a section in the calendar called focus star. The last thing is this outline item, which is a triangle, and I'm going to draw it like this. And this triangle basically is going to be an icon that you can refer to in the outline section. We'll take a look at that in just a second. Now, if I tap on this circle, you can see the section that is included with the circle. You can see the dashed lines. You can do it with the focus star as well. There's the dashed lines. And then you can even do it with the triangle, like so. So this tells you what writing is associated with the icon. You can also go into this little icon right here. And if you go to the mark section, you can see those 3 items that we've identified here. And these are all hyperlinked. So if I click on, say, this triangle item, then it will highlight that and take me to that page. So I can have a notebook full of pages, and then I can jump between things by clicking on this icon, going to the Mark tab, and then all my within the notebook, all of my icons will be listed here. So that's one functionality of these items. As far as I can tell, this is the only place where the triangle is relevant. The triangle doesn't integrate to anything in the calendar, but the circle and the star do. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. Now we're going to start with the circle, and we've created this as a task. Let's go ahead and get out of Notes, and we'll click out of this, and we'll go into Schedule. And if we click on the task icon, this is that icon. I didn't quite translate that properly, so I believe I said this. What did I say? This will be a task. So it captured it there, but here in tasks, it says this will beat ask. So that's a great example of how the OCR, even when it's fairly obvious, because in this case I wrote it out in print, it doesn't necessarily translate it very well. Now, if I want to complete a task, all I have to do is click on this icon, and it'll create a check mark, it'll line it out, and it'll actually eventually move it over to this completed tab where it will reside until I delete it or get rid of it in some way. Now what's interesting is that to create the task, we were in the Notes app, and it basically brought the item over here to the task list. And if I'd clicked on the check mark in the Notes app, it would have been clicked on here as a completed task as well. So in other words, information from Notes transfers over to this task list, but not the other way around. So if I go back to where this task was originally created, you'll notice there's a circle there, not a check mark. So let's take a look at that. And see, there it is. Conversely though, I'm going to go ahead and check this like so. I'm going to uncheck it. So now, when I go back into calendar, I expect this item to be unchecked. And that is in fact the case. So that's basically how tasks work. Any information in Notes gets transferred over to here. You can just manage your tasks here within this app, but it will not update when you manage here into Notes. But that's different from focus stars. Let's go ahead and click on focus stars. You can see again, that's not what I wrote. I didn't write this will be a CCO. I wrote instead, this will be a focus. So again, another example of where the OCR is not great. It's good if you got neat handwriting, but it's still not perfect. What's different with the focus star is that if you click on it here in the Notes, obviously that will change in the focus star area of the calendar. Let's see if we can get out of here. There we go. Okay. And if I click on this here and get rid of that, okay, and then we go back to Notes, it will be reflected in the Notes as being unchecked. What's also different about this is that checking on the star is different than a task. In that what it does is it puts the highlighted items on top and all your other stars are listed below. So it's not like a task where it's either open and then completed, rather it's whether it's prioritized or not. And that's basically how these smart tools work on this device. So I want to highlight right now how AI is integrated into the device, and this won't be exclusive, but I'm going to cover the main ways in which that happens. So first off, you do have your chatbot interface down below, so I can swipe here at any time, and this interface comes up. It does record both text as well as audio, so I can click on this, for example, and talk in my query, or I can type in my query using the keyboard. And then it will give a response just like you would expect from a chatbot. So nothing particularly unusual there. Let's go ahead and minimize that. There's also the ability to do AI searches in Notes. And so you have this icon here, but I also have the ability to basically focus on a particular word. So we're going to focus on this house cats. And then this icon comes up. I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And then it messes up the OC. It's got the letters right, but the spacing wrong. And then it'll basically give you a focused chatbot response based on what you circle. And then finally, if I do click on this particular item, you can see that there are a few different options that are available. Now, AI Aid is also the tool that you use when you click on the button on top of the device. Let's go ahead and back out of this. And what I've generally found is it's best for, it's kind of like having, any type of assistant that we're used to, where you do vocal commands and it executes those commands, probably most effectively as it relates to the calendar app. So, create a reminder for a meeting today at 3 p.m. And there it is. So as you noticed, it initially got what I said slightly wrong, but it then fixed itself and got it correctly. I tend to find that the verbal input like this does work better than the OCR function that is a little more variable, as we're seeing in some of these demonstrations. But there's a great example of it successfully taking my order and executing it. And indeed, if we go into the schedule app, we can see there's our meeting reminder there. And of course, I could go in here and edit it as needed. This seems to be, to me, the most effective use of that button, which is basically integrating with the calendar. I haven't found it to be particularly useful related to applications, so let's use this as an example. Open the Kindle app. Okay, and you can see it took me here into Google Play as opposed to the Kindle app itself. And I can show you that, let's see if we can go home here. There we go. Go to apps. The Kindle app is in fact installed. It needed to be updated, but it's installed. So the AI Aid was not particularly useful in this case in being able to bring that app up, let alone me saying, please open up the Kindle app so I can read X book. I mean, you can't even get to that step. So it's not particularly good for that purpose. You can probably create a new notebook. Let's go ahead and do that. Create a new notebook. And then there you are in a notebook. So it's okay, particularly for the functionality that's native to the device. Is it better than just going into Notes and creating a new notebook? It could be a little bit useful in the sense that some of the navigation on the device isn't particularly great. You have to click a number of times to get from place to place. So the AI Aid is helpful in, like, I didn't have to go into the Notes app. I just went ahead and created a new note. I have tried to get it to open up pre-existing notes, and it's very mixed in terms of that regard. So ultimately, the AI Aid is quite limited, but it does have some useful functionality. I want to say a few words about the scheduling and reading apps. And we won't go into this in a detailed fashion, but just at a high level. We've already talked about the scheduling app in terms of tasks and focus stars. And the calendar itself is fairly straightforward in terms of having basic functionality. You can create a memo, you can create events and what have you. The only thing I'll point out in addition to that is in terms of importing other calendars, you are limited to just Google Calendar. There's no other options available. So all you get is whatever you do on this device, with your iFlytek account and how you integrate your Google Calendar. That's it here. Now, in terms of reading, we'll go ahead and click out of that. In terms of reading, you can integrate with OneDrive. That's possible. You cannot integrate with Google Drive. However, you do have the ability, if you click on this icon, to do either the cloud import would be from OneDrive, but you can also do a Wi-Fi and a USB import. I brought on these documents using the Wi-Fi import. It worked great. That's where you have to make sure this device and the device you're connecting to with the browser are on the same Wi-Fi channel, and then you can drag files and bring them over. So that was perfectly fine. And as you can see, we've got PDFs, we have EPUBs in here. I'll point out that with PDFs, links do work. So there's Monday, here's Wednesday, there's Wednesday, there you go. So that does work here, hyperlinks within PDFs. EPUBs, of course, work. And then with PDFs, you do have the ability for pinch and zoom. So here's an example of that. And if I want to go ahead and expand that out, then I would use 2 fingers to basically move around a zoomed in page. So that works fairly well. I would argue that overall the annotation functions on the device are fine. They're a little bit on the basic side, but you can write on files. You can use the select tool. We'll go ahead and select this. Okay, it doesn't recognize that as text. I have had it on other documents where it does. So let's take a quick look at that. We'll go in here. Here we go. Oops, I have to go select, like so. And there we go. And then you can highlight and copy, etc. We'll go ahead and highlight that. So, pretty basic functionality in the document. Nothing to write home about, but, it makes a decent reader as far as that goes. Okay, let's start talking about the battery results for the iFlytek AINote 2. And I've indicated that device there in the top row, which is in purple. And below it in the blue rows are all the 10-inch devices that I've ever done these same battery tests on. And one exception, I did include the iFlytek AINote Air 2 just for interesting comparison purposes. And at the bottom of the table, you can see the average and the median of all the devices that I've ever tested. These are all the e-ink note-taking devices that I've tested. So we're going to start off with the standby with the screen off. And this is basically when the device is kind of on a readiness mode, but the screen has, the screensaver on. So if you press the power button, you're only a couple seconds away from being able to engage the device. So it's a sleep mode, it's a state of readiness essentially, but with low battery drain. And in the case of the iFlytek, it received a 0.05% drain per hour, which is quite low. It's not a record, but it's well below the average and the median. So a good result here for the AINote 2. Then if you have standby with the screen on, think of this as having, say, the device on your desk and ready to write at any moment. You just pick the stylus up and start writing on the screen. So that's what this mode represents. You're going to have a little more battery drain as a result of this, this level of readiness. And in iFlytek's case, that was a 2.4% battery drain per hour. That's worse than both the average and the median. It's certainly far from the worst result ever recorded, but it is a weaker result in general. And then if we look at Wi-Fi, this is having Wi-Fi on in the background. This is not actively, downloading on Wi-Fi. It's just what is the cost of having, in terms of battery drain, of having Wi-Fi on at all times. And in this case, the answer is 3.7%. Again, a higher rate than we see with the average and the median, not the worst, but generally below average. Now we're going to go into what's some of my more practical tests, first reading and then writing. And I always choose the Kobo app if available, and that definitely was the case here. And the battery drain is 3.1%, again, worse than the average and the median, but not by a large margin, and far from the worst device on the list. The last test that I conducted is what I call my continuous note-taking test. And this is a pretty intensive test. I write with literally no pauses for 10 minutes straight. It's a very intensive writing test. And then at the 10-minute mark, I start to gauge the battery indicator, and then I see when that changes, and that's when I finally complete the test and make my full measurement. And in the case of the AINote 2, that was a 13.3% battery drain per hour, which is, again, worse than the average and worse than the median, but not notably terrible. And I think that ultimately becomes the overall assessment of the 5 battery tests that I did for this device. It doesn't have front lighting, so I didn't do tests around that. So of the 5 things that I did test, 4 of them, the AINote performed worse than average, but not in a particularly notable way. So overall, I would indicate that the AINote has below average battery life, but far from terrible battery life. And that would be my overall assessment of this device. Okay, we're going to start off now by looking at the primary pros of this device. And these are the things that I think might be reasons why you might want to purchase it. And we're just going to start off with that it's a generally solid e-note-taking device. It doesn't have the widest range of features of devices out there, but it's far from the simplest either. It has a good set of features that are available. And obviously notes are really central to what this device is about. So it definitely delivers for the most part on that front. In addition to that, the smart tools are really useful, a very creative idea that iFlytek brings to the table. They're not new with this device. These same smart tools were there for the Air too, but nevertheless, they continue here and still remain fairly unique in the industry. I mean, you have elements of what smart tools do here in other devices, but I've never seen quite this specific combination of features and functionality. So a nice job on the part of this device. It does have Google Play access, so you can download apps. Not all Google Play apps will work because they're not all designed for an e-ink screen, but reading type apps generally do quite well, and other apps can work too, like you could do, for example, cloud storage apps, that maybe isn't supported natively by the device. You can still download that app, like Google Drive is a great example of that, and other things as well. So that just adds a lot of functionality having that Google Play access. The display is sharp and clear. You know, there are a number of displays at this point that have, 300 ppi and what have you, but it's still worth noting. There's still devices that, are being sold today that don't have quite at this level. So very nice display. The fact that it has a Mobius screen is great just for the durability perspective. So that's nice. Now, in terms of the primary cons, these are the reasons why you might not want to buy the device. And it's of course going to start with the price. It really does sell at a premium. And at additional $100, say, over the Viwood's AI paper, I just don't know that this device justifies it. In addition to that, the navigation isn't great on the device. For example, there's really no home screen button. The closest that comes to that is you bring up the task manager and there's a home button there. But the home button doesn't always go to the home screen of the device. Sometimes it's the home screen of the section that you're in. Very clunky. It takes a few strokes or, keystrokes or touches, if you will, to go from the notes to the calendar. So just a lot of things that could have been done a little bit better. They're not terrible, but other devices do it better. The smart tools are nice, as we just noted, and bring some creative ideas to the table, but to really use them and to really be effective, they rely on OCR. So they're translating your handwriting into text. And I find that to be a pretty variable experience. Now, in full disclosure, my handwriting just isn't that good. But I think you saw examples in the beginning of this video where I'm demonstrating the device, where I'm writing in print. It's pretty obvious, at least to me, what I wrote, and yet the OCR doesn't really fully translate it very well. So I think that that's a definite weakness, and the smart tools could have been even more impressive if the OCR was at the same level to match. Okay, let's start to talk about the secondary pros now. And these are things that are really worth calling out, but you wouldn't necessarily make a buying decision on them. And we're going to start with the hardware. The hardware is of really good quality. Now, we're in a time where most manufacturers can develop high quality devices. So in that sense, it doesn't stick out. That's why it's not a primary pro. But nevertheless, that's definitely a pro here. It's really well designed. I didn't see any flaws in the hardware. The stylus is solid. It's not the best stylus I've ever used, but I like the fact that it's a little bit thicker. I had no problems using it. It attaches really nicely to the device, so good pluses about that stylus all around. The quick notes, this is one of the neatest features of the device, and it's just not important enough to be a primary pro in my mind, but I think this is the best implementation of quick notes that I've seen on any device. And most devices have a quick note function that allows you to get into notes without having to go through the wizard where you might select the template or you might select, name the file. That's not quite what this is. This is a swipe in the bottom of the screen, no matter where you are on the device. And a notebook, maybe a little over a third of the screen appears kind of like a sticky note on the side, and you can jot down notes. If you close that and you come back to it, the notes will be there. Unless you decide to clear them out or you move them into a notebook, And you can have multiple pages. So I just think the implementation of that is really amazing. And again, no matter where you are in the device, you can pull it up, jot some notes, and then have it disappear. So just really love the implementation there. It is light and thin. Thinness isn't a huge factor in my opinion, but the lightness absolutely is, and it is notably lighter than the next competitor. I think it is almost 100 grams lighter than the next competitor in the e-ink space. So very notable, and I didn't notice it at first, but the more I use the device, you really start to appreciate that lightness. It does have search on handwriting. Not every manufacturer has search on handwriting, but this one does. It has universal pen selection, so no matter where you are, if you're in their place where you're in documents like PDFs, if you're in a notebook, you're in the quick notes, wherever you are where you can write, that universal pen selection will be the pen type and thickness that will apply there. So it's nice to have that universally applied across the system. Okay, so let's close out then with some secondary cons. And these, again, are things I don't think are enough to say, to persuade someone not to buy the device, but they are annoying things I think are worth calling out. And we'll start with the battery life. It's on the weaker side. I won't elaborate too much because we went over battery results just previous to this section, but generally speaking, it's below average pretty much across the board. There is some ghosting. Now, ghosting is always present on e-ink devices. It's just a matter of how pervasive it is. And even on the highest kind of definition refresh setting, where you'd see very little ghosting on most devices, you see some here. Is it a really big deal? No, it tends to be faint. You can always use a gesture, 2 taps in the middle of the screen to get rid of it. But there was a little bit more than I thought there were on comparable devices. The AI agent, this is the button on top where you're basically using the microphones to talk to a query. It can do calendar invites or reminders for you, but I don't find that it's particularly useful. I couldn't get it to, for example, open up an application. I couldn't get it to open a particular note because it just couldn't quite translate what I was saying in the right way, or at least understand that I was saying a note title. So I didn't particularly think it was useful. Now, it's fine if you're looking for a chatbot interface with kind of a verbal input. In that sense, it's fine. But you can also use their normal AI button to bring up a chatbot, and you can verbally communicate that way as well. So I just didn't think it brought too much to the table. It could benefit from a better film. A lot of devices nowadays have a nice film on it that doesn't obscure what you're seeing that much, and it has a nice sound as you write. And I missed that here. I didn't particularly appreciate the writing sound on the device. It wasn't bad, but it didn't stick out in a good way. And a lot of companies have surfaces that sound better than this one. It is missing note features. I won't go over the complete list, but things like there's no layers, for example. There's no expanded canvas unless you're talking about the mind mapping feature, but that's a very specific tool in the notes. And there are other features as well. It's not basic. It's at a higher level than, say, a Kindle Scribe. It probably provides a little bit more than remarkable, but it's not nearly at the level of a Supernote or a Books. There's no front lighting. Now, in terms of note-taking, I don't know if that's that particularly concerning issue, but the one thing I kind of lament is that lightness of size, lightness for its size rather, it would be amazing as an e-reader, but unfortunately, because there's no front lighting, it's limited to what environments that you can read in. I tend to read in environments that have maybe, they're comfortable, but they don't have the best lighting, and front lighting really helps there. That's not the case here. So it just feels like an opportunity lost. It's not sluggish. It's generally snappy in most cases, but there are places where it kind of bogs down just a little bit, and it's not the easiest thing to navigate around. Again, I don't want to overstate that. It's not a reason not to buy the device, but it is something that you would notice. The calendar rather only has Google Calendar integration. So for example, you couldn't integrate Outlook into that calendar. So that's a limitation. Finally, you do get a gigabyte of cloud services, and that's probably more than you need. But if you want additional storage, there is a fee. It's not clear what that fee is. And most people wouldn't need that. So again, this is a minor gripe, but I am getting consistent reminders from the device to sign up for the service or dismiss the notification. And apparently that's just going to keep coming. little bit of an annoying thing there, and I wouldn't recommend anyone buying this device if they thought they needed that cloud storage option, because the competitors don't pay you for that, or don't make you pay for that. Okay, so having gone over all those pros and cons, what's my overall recommendation? And it's probably obvious, but I just don't recommend this device, and the primary driver is its price point. I just don't think that you should pay a premium for the features that you get from the device. I think there's other devices out there that are better value. And of course, I talked in my first video about this being competition to the Viwoods AI paper. I would take the Viwoods AI paper over the iFlytek pretty much every time. Now, iFlytek does have a couple neat ideas here that I think would be great if a device like the Viwoods AI paper had. I think iFlytek's, really does compete quite well against the Viwoods device as it relates to search and reference. Those smart tools, even with the limitations of OCR that I talked about and showed earlier in the video, I still think it brings a lot more to the table that I really wish Viwoods had as well. Viwoods is still kind of clinging to what Remarkable does, which is just to tag an entire page. And I think that what iFlytek is bringing is definitely superior to that. So that's a feather in iFlytek's cap. The problem is, beyond that, there just isn't much there. And I think there's a lot of stuff that the Viwoods device does a lot better, and of course, again, quite a bit cheaper. So that's my overall assessment. I guess if I had to explain it, there's a lot of neat ideas with the iFlytek device, and this was true when I reviewed the Air 2 as well. I mean, in a lot of ways, very similar devices in terms of how I feel about them. So a lot of these great ideas that are kind of unique, and we talked about the smart tools, but the quick notes I really love a lot as well. But when you talk about how all that stuff comes together and then the price point, I think that's where the iFlytek eventually kind of stumbles, and I just don't think that I can recommend it. Now, I do want to tell a couple stories here about my interactions with iFlytek, which I didn't think were that great. And so I'm just kind of sharing these, not so much from the perspective that, these are things you might necessarily be concerned about as a buyer, because a lot of these have to do with my interactions with them as a YouTube creator and my interactions with them as a Kickstarter contributor. I guess I'm sharing these more from the lens of, just so you know, this is kind of in the back of my mind as I'm doing this review. I don't think they influence how I reviewed the device, but you just never know, and I'm just going to throw them out there for your consideration. But I don't necessarily think they're things other people should necessarily care about. And I even kind of thought about, do I include these or not? I just said, yeah, just go ahead and throw it in there in the sake of full disclosure. So we're going to start off with my story around interacting with them as a YouTube creator. And this was roughly, I want to say, around the August timeframe this year, when they reached out to me and asked if I would like to collaborate. Now, I should point out that when a company reaches out to collaborate, it usually takes one of two forms, and both forms are legitimate. But one I'll do, and the other I don't want to have any part of. So the one that I'll do is when a company basically says, look, I have this product, I think it's excellent, I think it matches what you do on your channel, and if given the chance, I think you would enjoy this product and have good things to say about it. So we're going to give you a device, and then you run with it, and then that's it. We might give you some talking points, but there's no contract related to that. There's no expectation of what the deliverable is. We're just going to give you a device. You're going to basically Scout's honor to make a video, and it is what it is. If you don't like it, you can say you don't like it. If you love it, you can say you love it, and all the points in between. So that's one way to go about it. Another way to go about it, though, is where the company is a little more controlling of the message. And so this is the one where they're basically looking for YouTubers as kind of marketing free agents, right? So someone that would come in and basically take their talking points and put together a video to kind of help sell and promote their device. This is one where you might sign a contract, and you might get some scripting, or at least an idea of scripting that the company is asking you to follow, or they want certain points hit. Again, both of these are legitimate ways to engage YouTubers, and this happens all the time. You probably have seen experience of watching someone talk about a device and going, hey, that's kind of like an ad. And yes, that's exactly what it is. That person has a deal with a company to basically present their device in a positive light. So those are generally the two ways that companies can approach you. There's nothing wrong with that. So iFlytek reached out to me and they said, do you want to collaborate? And it wasn't clear which of the two methods they were pursuing. So I responded, and actually the timing was kind of interesting because I was in the process of consolidating my final review of the Air 2, which is the 8-inch version of this device essentially. And I kind of knew what the strengths and weaknesses were, very similar to what we talked about today. Some differences, but a lot of the high points are similar. And I basically gave them my review. I didn't give them the video, but I bulleted out how I was going to approach the device because I was just wanted to be fully transparent. I was basically saying, look, there's some things I like here, but there's a lot of things I don't like here. And if you have me review your device, this is what it's going to look like essentially. In addition to that, I gave my normal terms, which makes it very clear that they're going to have no control over the video. They're trusting me to do a review in the hopes that it will be positive, and it is what it is. So anyway, I was very, very clear about that when I responded to them. They then responded to me, and I'm going to paraphrase on this, but they were very kind of, the conversation was a little weird. It became clear in retrospect that they were kind of talking past me, that they didn't read really or comprehend or care about the information I'd given them. And I was very open with them, right? I was very transparent. I didn't need to talk about how I was going to review their Air 2 device. I was just doing that as a professional courtesy. So it rubbed me the wrong way when they kind of didn't acknowledge that. And then, I wasn't quite clear what they were getting at. So I said, okay, I'll go ahead and collaborate. And then they send me a contract. And at that moment, I'm like, okay, I'm out. I'm not working with this company. First of all, I don't do that. I don't do advertisements for other companies. I only do, what I talked about earlier, which is you give me a device, I'll review it, but the review is going to be what it's going to be. But in this case, it's like, well, we want you to, and they even had they didn't have script, but they had scenarios. We want to touch you on these points and that sort of thing. And I was just like, peace out, So I had a bad taste in my mouth with that interaction. Now, again, the fact that they were looking for that type of marketing is fine. That happens all the time. I think what I didn't like in particular is how I basically told them exactly what I'm about, what my terms were, and they just kind of kept going as if I hadn't said anything at all. I found that incredibly unprofessional. Now, to play a little bit of devil's advocate to how I felt about that, there are times we are dealing with these companies that speak different languages, that they don't, they know English, but they don't know the nuances of English, and things can get lost. And so is it possible that was just a communication mishap between myself and the marketing folks? Yes, that's always possible. You have to acknowledge that as a possibility. But I just felt coming out of that I didn't like how that interaction went. And I had no intention at that point of working with them as a YouTuber. Okay, so the other situation is I backed their Kickstarter campaign, and I was backer number 21. So I really made it a point to be an earlier backer so that I can get the device as quickly as possible, because the quicker I can get reviews like this out, I just get more views that way. I mean, that's as simple as that. And I was interested in reviewing the device based on how I'd reviewed the Air 2. I didn't recommend the Air 2 either, but there was enough there that was interesting that I wondered if they would be able to develop that into this device. It turns out the answer is no, but I didn't know that at the time. So I was the 21st in line, so I'm thinking, great, I'm right there in line. And so as we're going along, the communication's okay. It could be a little bit better. But that's true of a lot of Kickstarter campaigns, frankly. I mean, so in some ways that's not particularly unusual. But then there was this weird kind of thing at the end. And what happened is they started distributing the devices in November. People outside of America or the United States was able to get their devices quicker than people that were in the United States. And basically, I had made a couple posts inquiring as to my particular order, because I'd seen people who had backer numbers that were, over 1,000, and they were getting their devices. And I'm like, wait, where's my device? And there was no responsiveness to my particular posts, which I didn't I didn't particularly care for. And in particular, one of their posts, they talked about, well, we're going to delay the shipment in the United States because we didn't box the pen refills. There was a snafu in manufacturing. And I'd posted, well, I get what you're saying there, but mine didn't have that pen refill. That's not what I selected, so why would my package be delayed? And there was never a response, and they ended up throwing a refill in there anyway, so maybe that's why they just said, forget it, we'll just throw one in every box. I really have no idea. But the communication there was particularly poor. But what really irked me, the thing that kind of got me a little bit, well, I'll just say it, is that while my device wasn't shipping, I could have gone on to Amazon and ordered a device and gotten it within a couple days. So literally there was an over 2-week delay in getting my device where I just could have bought it off of Amazon. Now, they never stated in their Kickstarter campaign that you're guaranteed, a backer is guaranteed to get the device before it's available on the marketplace. That's implied, and I've seen that implication play out in other Kickstarter campaigns, but it wasn't stated. So I guess a devil's advocate view of my take on this situation could be, well, you got a really good discount on the device, and I did. I paid for about $500 as opposed to $600 plus. And I still got it in the month they said they were going to send it. So, is this really a problem? But I think I look at this in the bigger picture of, how I've been approached as a YouTube creator and their communication in general. And again, it doesn't give me a warm and fuzzy about this particular company. Then you throw in how it was packaged, a lack of any type of packaging, no issues as a result of that, but I feel like I kind of lucked out in that regard. And then you look at the fact that they're pushing their cloud services and, an additional amount of money for that if you go over 1 gigabyte. And there's all these little things that make me go, this is not a company I really want to engage with. Now, again, a lot of what I'm talking about are things very particular to me as a YouTube creator and as a backer of this Kickstarter campaign. So if you're someone who is, just looking to purchase a device, should you care about any of that? Probably not. But I did want to share it again because it did kind of color and be in the back of my mind as I'm reviewing this device. I don't think that it had any impact on my final determinations. I don't think it influenced my review, but it's definitely something that was there kind of in the background of my mind. So do with that what you will. Okay, just to wrap things up, going back to my first video, there was some chatter in the comments about concerns around security and this particular company, iFlytek. And this is well beyond my area of expertise, so I don't really have anything particularly insightful to say about that. If you're interested, go check out those comments, but I'm not a security expert and I'm just not qualified to comment on that at all. I just will say the following, however, just for food for thought. If you have any concerns that this device might be tracking you and handing it off to another government, I'll just remind you that given the quality of this OCR, I'm not so sure that government's going to get any useful information, but you do with that what you will. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any questions, please put those into the comments. Otherwise, look forward to seeing you in the next video.